Right, 5 weeks out from the Olympia. It's been a little bit. We're outside the Muscle Factory. It's actually cooler in Texas today, and it's our leg day today. Renee and I trained together. Haven't done one of those sessions in a bit, and feeling pretty fresh today, so should have a good session. I took my check-in pics and stuff. I'm processing what I want to do, and we'll just get to training, and then afterwards we'll dive into my check-ins and all the nuts and bolts of what I'll do diet change-wise with nutrition and steps or whatever I'm gonna do. Let's go train. All right, so starting out this session with a dumbbell lateral. I know I said leg day, but I usually have been doing laterals in the front end of my leg sessions, so I hit side delts 3 days a week. I realize when I'm not doing that, my delts usually start to drop off, so I think my volume gets below even what I need to maintain on prep. So what I do is I do a compound set, so I'll do or super set, whatever you want to call it, of a dumbbell lateral while I warm up on my leg extension, and just go back and forth between the two. I think if you're following like push-pull legs, on the front end of legs, it's really a convenient spot to put on some of the smaller muscle groups you're trying to bring up. So a lot of guys might tack on biceps on the front end, or you could even do like a lat pullover, something that's isolation, not taxing, and get your like total volume allocation for the weekend. So do 4 sets of these dumbbell laterals, and pairing that with a bilateral leg extension. So hitting this day, just doing 2 legs rather than single leg. My normal quad session I do in midweek, it's all single leg based, which takes a while. So for time's sake and training with Renee, we'll stay bilateral today and do 3 sets of leg extension. So on these laterals, what I do like to do is keep the reps higher. So I got my mouthpiece in, so I might talk one. But on this day, so I'll stay in the closer to 15 reps, so it's not as taxing. And the dumbbells, they load pretty much in the shortened phase, so I can get a really good mind-muscle connection. It helps carry me over to my other lateral raise days where I'm loading more lengthened. So if you have like this day, you don't want it to be overly taxing from a connective tissue standpoint, like load the muscle short. So if you need like a fly today, like doing like a cable fly setup where it loads more short position over lengthen, or you could set up a prime fly like that and loading the cams. And then on my leg extension, one thing that I had done was dry needling the past 2 weeks, which my quads have been getting a bit tight, connective tissues beat up. Can tell like this is the point where like I take a downward spiral. So I had dry needling done last week. I actually took off my Friday leg session and let them recover. Had dry needling again yesterday. I mean, I'll tell you, I think it's the most effective thing I've had for tissue recovery. If you think about it, these needles can go so deep, farther than someone could go manually, and sending a stimulus that's similar to a muscle contraction to fire and activate these tissues and get them to actually remodel and adapt to that stimulus. It's extremely effective if you have someone that knows what they're doing. So Justin Reyna at the Modern Movement here in San Antonio is really, really good at it. So on the leg extension now, feels buttery, so just keep warming up. So one thing you'll see with Ray and I loading on the prime is that we put most of the weight on the top peg. So this session, I have the most rest days before my midweek quad session. So I get a lot of stimulus this week with loading the leg extension lengthened. And I have my squat pattern, which is kind of more mid-range lengthened. But this one will create the most soreness, but in turn also, not from soreness, but also the most stimulus, just coincidentally. Those usually go together. But that midweek session, I have the shortest amount of rest from that session to this session. So that's why I do load more in the shortened pattern, not a lot of lengthen, higher reps, so it's not as creating much connective tissue damage leading into this session. So I can get my total weekly volume in, but manage fatigue between these sessions really well. All right, finished off our leg extensions. 3 sets there. Moving on to our squat pattern. So on my leg days, quads go first, hamstring second. That's in order of priority. So if you need hamstrings more than quads, so you train it in the opposite. Now, one thing I do like that I think is so time efficient in keeping a high stimulus is I just do 2 quad movements today. Leg extension and a squat. If you think about how the quad, its function, it primarily is just knee extension. So you just have a hinge joint, so it's not overly complicated Because I see some programming where you do a leg extension, then a squat, then a leg press, then a split squat, and a lot of those are very repetitive to where you're having to still build up to a certain degree, load the machines to do a few sets of each. Instead, why don't you just do more sets of fewer exercises, and it can absolutely fully train the full range of motion of the quad and its function. Then take that volume and put it on another day. Because a lot of people are doing split squats at the end of their leg session when it's the most braced movement that you have to stabilize, and the output's really low from it. So you better do it when you're fresh. So we keep it easy today, and do 3 sets extensions, and then today's my Rogers squat day. So I rotate this in the pendulum squat. So this day I get a little bit of glute in. My other day is more quad biased. But we'll do the Rogers squat for 3 sets, and then move on to our hamstring work. This one will stay in the 8 to 12 rep range, while leg extensions was more 12 to 15 reps, keeping it a little bit higher. Just makes sense. Like if you're doing 8 rep leg extension, you'll know why you shouldn't do an 8 rep leg extension. Whew, squat. Destroyed my numbers today. Feel really good. I'm gassed. With the dry needling, a lot of it was done on my hip, and the issues I was feeling was around my knee. So usually knee stuff, it comes from above or below the knee. So mine was more in the hip, but I feel so much more stable with just putting in force to the ground, and the output's just so much higher. It makes you feel so confident in your squat. So now Renee, well, for one, on the squat, I load the bottom peg on the Rogers. For me, it's more of a safety profile thing. You could load the top and it'd be loaded pretty lengthened. However, just with where my knees and stuff are feeling, I've been loading just bottom peg, so it lets off a bit on the bottom. One thing you need to know about the Rogers is that it does swing forward on the bottom, so it will shoot you onto your toes. Or if you're trying to cue a more glute biased squat, this isn't a machine for you. Because if you push hips back and that's your cue, as the machine pivots forward, it's going to want to pull you over your toes. So it's going to feel like a lot of lower back is how you'll feel the sensation. What you need to cue on this one is squat just straight down and let the knees push forward. This will emulate more of a front squat. Like I find the Rogers is more of a quad bias type of squat. So it's perfect for, I think, for bodybuilding, because you get a little glute, but it's still a ton of quad, which is really what you want. If you're like someone in wellness, or you have just terrible glutes, you want like more like a Smith squat, something where you can really, or just a regular back squat, so you can just really push your hips back. Renee, back was feeling kind of iffy and not stable, so we moved her to the Rogers hip press today, just to get in her press volume work. So when you don't feel stable, move to a more braced position. Don't just train through it. You know, there's times where you feel like this feels iffy, just move to something more stable. All right, quads are done. Moving on to hamstring work. So started with a seated leg curl. If I have to choose between lying or seated, I always go seated because it will fully train the hamstring and lengthen. I also like it after the Rogers squat, as I do have a bit of fatigue in the lower back, so move to a pretty braced leg curl where it's easy to stabilize the hip, versus going to like a lying leg curl where you do have to really work hard to stabilize the hip. That's better like earlier in a session, or like if you have a hamstring focused day, like putting that earlier on, train it short before doing like an RDL or something like that. So, but I don't have a lot of volume for hamstrings, so the movements I do pick are like really high stimulus space. So I do this seated leg curl, 3 sets, 12 to 15 reps, and then move to my dumbbell RDL from here. If you want a good leg curl tip, as you flex the knee, drive the knee up into the pad. It'll help keep you from wanting to go do hip extension. That's when you see people's hips like rotate and their lower back will be like, I feel my lower back a lot. So if you drive the knee up into the pad, it's cueing some hip flexion, and you'll feel a lot more in hamstrings just because you're not bringing other musculature into it to try to move it. Give it a try, and you'll feel a ton of hamstring. All right, so finished out my last exercise, do RDL. I treat a dumbbell RDL extremely strict, so it's control the way down, control the way up, pause on the bottom. So I can brace it well because my load won't go as high as if I was using this as a very dynamic type of movement. So keep your RDL really strict. There's a lot of joints you have to control in this, so the faster you go, the more likely you are to break down in the movement, especially at the end of a session. But again, my hamstring volume is so low, I'm using movements that I get a lot out of. So just 10 to 12 reps on this one for 2 sets. And that wraps up the leg day. How was your leg session?
It was what it needed to be.
No, she had to alter her lift, so that kind of throws off the rhythm. You had like a good quad pump before that, right?
I did have a good quad pump.
She was primed for the day, but spine wasn't cooperating, right? Hips?
Kind of overall everything. I'm still recovering from my trip.
Renee went to Oregon, Sirius sister's wedding, so travel's rough on someone that we live in a monotonous life with. We're dialed in athletes,
and I got like 4 hours of sleep every night, so.
Yeah. So it's just travel. If you travel and you get poor sleep, don't just force the training to happen. Like, take some time off, recover, and then get back into training. Because you might come in here and get injured. That's happened to me. I've like gone and like, when I've torn my quad is when I traveled and tried to train without the same hydration and sleep. So anyway, we'll get back home. We'll sit down. We're going to go through my check-in and we'll decide together, what should we do with my physique?
Guys, he looks crazy. I saw him this morning. Just ridiculous.
So what would be your coaching advice? Sushi cheat meal.
And cookies.
And cookies, okay.
Okay, reasonable. 1 cookie.
One massive cookie.
1 living cookie.
Okay, to home we go. Okay, so we're back home. It's actually the next day, so Saturday. Ended up just sitting on what I wanted to do and waiting till today just to let my thoughts kind of process and look over the plan in depth more, and realizing that there's not a lot of time left here. Being 5 weeks out, my idea is basically I'd like to diet for like 3 weeks and then have 2 weeks, 1 week of bringing food back up to like a maintenance level and then ride that in a peak week basically. And what I'm looking at, because people look at my posing videos and stuff, they're like, dude, you're peeled out, just go on stage like that. It's like, it's like how lean you actually need to be is to see these finer details. What you bring on stage is a lot more than what is reflected in like someone's like gym photos with overhead lighting and the perfect conditions. And so even like fasted shots, like with the camera and video, like it doesn't pick up those fine details you see even in person. But anyway, what I wanted to show on the screen here was my comparison from, this is actually 1 week out from Vancouver, and I was like right around 229. This is my front, my most muscular. And then from today, yesterday, 238.4. And so this is the shot where I see the detail needs to come through. And you can see like in my, like the middle of my quads, my sartorius, that muscle that wraps around the inside of the quad, that's the sharpness that needs to come in. It's like just a little bit there. And then even in my midsection, it's not quite as tight. This is some of the areas that blur out on me first and where a little bit of body fat has come on. The encouraging thing is that, hey, my body weight's a lot higher. There's not much to pull off here, which I could anticipate even coming down like 5 pounds and being around 232, maybe even 233 when I get onto stage, which would be a significant improvement from all the last shows. Legs are a lot bigger, so that's what I wanted. If you look at my back shot, the comparison, the conditions nearly looks almost identical. You can see maybe like through a little bit of trap detail, maybe a little bit in the lower back, but my glutes are so much fuller that there's actually more detail in them, even with a little bit of body fat that's there. So this is what I look at to try to be gauging, like pulling back down in the time frame there. There's probably like 5 pounds that need to come off. 3 weeks is more than enough time to do so to make that happen. So what am I changing in my plan starting now? Well, main thing here is like I'm training legs twice a week. I want to make sure that I don't drive any more fatigue in my legs. So I'm not changing my steps or cardio or anything. So I'm doing 10,000 steps a day. That's going to stay the same. I also want to make them adequately fueling training. And I don't pull food down so much. So I find a lot of benefit around clenbuterol and just driving up energy as well. So I'm going to use a little bit of clenbuterol in place now just to create some of that energy expenditure. Clen also has a muscle retention aspect, so it's more than just burning calories and how it works. Also, there's some gear changes. I've had some Nandrol in place, some me swapping to Trimbolone, and that testosterone's been pretty high, and I'm leaving it because I see only a benefit in my physique from it. Growth hormone's been high. I only see a benefit out of that. So it's something very unique to me that most people might not be able to do on prep. But the main change I'm making is just pulling 100 grams of carbohydrate out of my training day diet, which is 6 days out of the week. Calories right now are around 3,800. So, relatively, we're pulling about 400 calories out. Then with the clean in place, probably being able to have that 500 calorie expenditure for about a pound or so to pull off. I will move faster than that. You can do all the math you want, but I already know like I will move fast, so I can always add food back in. So this will be like some of the initial change that I make there. And we'll just see what that response is and start doing my check-ins twice a week now. I've just been doing them once a week and see how we move. And we'll check in next week. We'll see what adjustments have been made, if I'm just already ready and I'm shredded, or if we need to push a little harder. But that was the decision made. If you want to follow along even closer in what I do on the daily, check out the J3U forum where I log everything. And I'll talk to y'all next time.